Duke Taylor was 34 when his father told him to leave his own sister's wedding. "Leave. Only family is allowed here," John Taylor said, standing firm at the entrance. Duke stood on a gravel path lined with white stones, his carry-on still in his hand after an 18-hour flight. Inside, soft music from a string quartet drifted through the glass doors. Guests laughed. His sister, Jane Taylor, smiled in a white gown like nothing was wrong. Behind John, Lois stood quietly, saying nothing. Duke lifted the invitation slightly. "I was invited," he said. John didn't even look. That was a mistake. Duke didn't argue. He turned, walked back to his car, and drove away, the music fading behind him. 3 days later, Lois called. Her voice was cold. "We need to talk about the bill." Duke frowned. "What bill?" A pause. Then she said, "The wedding venue. $38,000. Your name is on it." Duke sat up slowly in his hotel room. "My name?" John's voice cut in. "Don't act confused. You signed the guarantor contract." Duke's jaw tightened. "I didn't sign anything." John scoffed. "Then who did?" "A ghost." The call ended. Duke stared at the wall, replaying every word: contract, signature, guarantor. He worked in compliance. He understood what that meant. This wasn't a mistake. This was something serious. And for the first time, the pain faded, replaced by focus. 4 months earlier, the invitation arrived. A heavy cream envelope, expensive and formal. Inside, it invited Duke to Jane Taylor's wedding in Charlotte, North Carolina. A smaller card slipped out. Jane's handwriting. "It won't be complete without you. Please come." Duke read it twice. His family rarely reached out unless they needed something, so this felt unusual. He sat in his London apartment, turning the card slowly. His friend Mark leaned against the kitchen counter. "You really think this means something?" Mark asked. Duke shrugged. "I don't know. But I want to find out." Mark sighed. "Just don't expect too much." Duke nodded, already opening his laptop. Curiosity won. He booked the flight that night. Growing up in the Taylor house meant living 2 different lives. Jane's life was easy. She had parties, new clothes, and a car at 16. John called her "my little star," without hesitation. Duke's life was different. He filled out his college forms alone at the public library. He worked part-time jobs to save money. When he left for college, no one helped him pack or drove him. He didn't complain. He already understood his place. John ran a small supply shop and spoke of it like a big business. Lois kept peace by agreeing with him. And whenever tension rose, it landed on Duke. Not because he caused it, but because it was easier that way. Duke built his life without them. At 27, he moved to London for a compliance consulting job. He reviewed contracts, spotting details others missed. "You never miss anything," Mark once said. Duke smiled slightly. "That's the job." He bought a small apartment and kept his life simple. Everything he had, he earned himself. No help. No expectations. So when Jane's invitation came, it wasn't about forgiveness. It was curiosity. Maybe things changed, he told himself. Maybe this time is different. He booked the flight anyway. 18 hours across the world, carrying only a suitcase, and a quiet hope he didn't fully trust. Duke landed in Charlotte on a cold Friday evening. The airport smelled familiar, like coffee and warm bread. He picked up a rental car and drove to a hotel near the city center. He never stayed at his parents' house anymore. That had stopped years ago. From his room, he called Jane. She answered quickly. "You made it," she said, her voice rushed. "Anything I should know about tomorrow?" Duke asked. "Just be there by 2, she replied. "Ceremony starts at 3. Her tone was tight, like someone listening while speaking. "See you then." The call ended fast. Duke stared at his phone. Something felt off, but he couldn't explain it. He called Lois next. She answered on the second ring. "Oh, you actually came," she said. Duke paused. "Of course I came." Lois let out a small breath. "I thought you might change your mind. It's a long flight." She didn't say she was glad. Didn't say she missed him. Duke sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence stretch. "I'll be at the venue by 2, he said finally. "All right," she replied. The call ended. Duke looked around the quiet hotel room. The air felt heavy. Nothing had happened yet, but something already felt wrong. The next day, Duke dressed carefully. A simple navy suit, clean and sharp. He didn't want attention, just enough to belong. The venue stood at the end of a long gravel road, decorated with white lights. Through the tall windows, he saw chandeliers glowing. Music floated outside. As he walked toward the entrance, he saw John standing outside, hands in his pockets. Not greeting guests. Not smiling. Just waiting. Duke slowed. "Dad," he said. John stepped forward, blocking his path. "You need to leave." Duke blinked. "What?" John's voice hardened. "Only family is allowed. You weren't invited." Duke held up the invitation. "My name is on this," he said calmly. John didn't even glance at it. "That was a mistake." Duke looked past him. Inside, Jane stood laughing in her wedding dress. Lois watched from near the door but didn't move. "Dad, don't do this," Duke said quietly. John stepped closer. "Don't make a scene. Turn around and go." Duke felt the words settle deep. He didn't argue again. He turned, walked back down the gravel path, and got into his car. He didn't cry until the doors were closed. And even then, it wasn't about the wedding. It was about hope. Hope he should have known better than to carry. Back at the hotel, Duke sat in silence. Hours passed without him moving. Finally, he called Mark. "They turned me away," Duke said. Mark didn't hesitate. "That doesn't make sense. Why invite you at all?" Duke shook his head. "I don't know." Mark's voice sharpened. "Stay there. Don't leave yet." Duke sighed. "I just want to go home." "Not yet," Mark insisted. "People don't do something like that without a reason. Either they need something from you, or they're hiding something." Duke looked at the blank TV screen. He wanted to ignore that thought. But deep down, it made too much sense to dismiss. Duke opened his laptop that night and searched for an earlier flight back to London. His cursor hovered over the confirm button. One click, and he could leave everything behind. "Just go," he muttered. But Mark's words stayed in his head. "They're hiding something." Duke closed the laptop slowly. "One more day," he said to himself. If nothing happened, he would leave. If something did, he would be ready. He lay back on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the door, his father's face, and Jane laughing inside like he never existed. The next 2 days passed quietly. No calls. No messages. Duke worked remotely from his hotel desk, reviewing contracts like nothing had happened. It was easier to focus on documents than on people. On Monday morning, he made the mistake of opening social media. Jane's wedding photos filled the screen. The venue, the flowers, the smiles. Everything looked perfect. Duke scrolled slowly. Not a single photo of him. Not even a mention. It was as if he had never been there. Then he saw Lois's post. A collage of family pictures, including an old photo of him and Jane as kids. The caption read, "Proud of both my children." Duke stared at the word "both" until it felt meaningless. Tuesday morning, his phone rang. Lois again. Duke answered this time without hesitation. "We need to discuss the bill," she said immediately. Duke leaned back in his chair. "What bill?" "The venue," she replied. $38,000. Your name is on the contract." Duke's voice stayed calm. "I didn't sign anything." Papers shuffled on her end. Then John's voice came on. "Stop pretending. You're the guarantor." Duke pressed his hand against the desk. "I never agreed to that." John snapped. "Then explain why your name is there." Duke's eyes narrowed slightly. "I planned to." The line went dead again. This time, Duke didn't feel shocked. He felt focused. At 10:30, Duke called the wedding venue. A calm voice answered. "Event coordination, this is Ms. Reed speaking." Duke introduced himself. "I'm calling about the Taylor wedding on December 14th. I've been told I'm listed as the guarantor." "Yes," she said carefully. "We do have a guarantor on file." Duke took a slow breath. "I did not sign that agreement." Silence filled the line. "I'm sorry," she asked. "I'm saying that signature is not mine," Duke replied. Another pause. Then her tone shifted. "If that's true, this is a serious legal issue." Duke nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I'd like a copy of the contract." Ms. Reed explained the process. Duke needed to submit a formal request with identification. He followed every step immediately. Within 15 minutes, he had written the request, attached a copy of his passport, and sent it. Then he called Mark. "It's real," Duke said. "There's a contract with my name on it." Mark went quiet for a moment. "All right," he said finally. "Now we deal with it properly." Duke leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. 48 hours. That was how long it would take to get the document. 48 hours to confirm what he already suspected. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something planned. The calls started the next morning. Aunt Clara was first. "Duke, your mother is worried," she said gently. "She told us you promised to handle the venue." Duke frowned. "I never promised anything." Clara sighed. "Maybe there was a misunderstanding, but this is family." Duke ended the call politely, but more calls followed. Uncle Ray sent a long message about loyalty. His cousin Beth texted, "Just pay it. It's easier." Duke didn't argue. He saved every message, every call, every word. Years of compliance work had taught him one thing. When people start telling a story about you, you document everything. Because truth alone isn't enough. You need proof. Later that afternoon, Duke received a message from his cousin Leo. "Something feels off," Leo wrote. "They keep saying you promised, but I don't think that's true." Duke read it twice. One person out of many was asking questions. "Keep watching," Duke replied. Leo sent back a simple thumbs up. Duke set his phone down. The pressure was building, but so was clarity. The story being told about him was already spreading. And none of it was real. He knew then this wasn't just about money. It was about control. About making him carry something that was never his to begin with. Jane called that evening. Her voice was flat. "You need to pay the bill," she said. Duke leaned back slowly. "You had me thrown out of your wedding, and now you want me to pay for it?" Jane sighed. "That was Dad's decision." "And you said nothing," Duke replied. Silence followed. Then she said, "It's already done. Just pay it and move on." Duke's voice stayed calm. "I didn't sign anything." Jane sounded irritated. "You make good money. It's not a big deal." Duke closed his eyes briefly. "Did you know he used my name?" Another pause. Longer this time. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. That told him everything. The next morning, John called again. His tone was sharper now. "You have 30 days to pay before legal action starts," he said. Duke almost smiled. "Did your lawyer tell you what happens if the signature was forged?" Silence filled the line. Then John snapped, "No one forged anything." Duke sat up straighter. "I'll have the contract today. We'll see." John's voice rose. "You think you're smarter than everyone?" Duke replied calmly, "I think I know what my own signature looks like." The call ended. Duke stared at his phone. John hadn't denied it. Not really. He had avoided it. And that silence spoke louder than any answer. That afternoon, the email arrived. The contract was attached. Duke didn't open it right away. He stood by the window, breathing slowly, steadying himself. Then he clicked. Page by page, he read through the document. Venue details. Payment terms. Then the guarantor section. His name was there. Duke Taylor. And beneath it, a signature. Duke leaned closer. It looked similar, but it wasn't his. The strokes were wrong. The flow was off. Someone had tried to copy it, but they failed. Duke placed his passport beside the screen and compared the two. They didn't match. "That's not mine," he said quietly. And in that moment, everything became clear. Duke called Mark immediately. "I've seen it," he said. "It's not my signature." Mark didn't hesitate. "Then that's forgery." Duke sat down slowly. "It's obvious when you compare it." Mark's tone turned serious. "Good. That's what we use." Within an hour, Mark arrived at the hotel with his laptop and notes. They sat at the small desk, reviewing every page. "We go step by step," Mark said. "You write to the venue. State clearly you didn't sign. Attach your passport. Request verification." Duke nodded. This was his world now. Documents, facts, proof. Not emotions. Not arguments. Just evidence. Duke drafted the letter carefully. Every word mattered. He explained he had never signed the guarantor agreement, had no knowledge of it, and had not given permission for anyone to sign on his behalf. He attached a copy of his passport signature for comparison. Mark reviewed it twice. "Clear and direct," he said. Duke sent it that afternoon. Then he leaned back, staring at the screen. "What happens next?" he asked. Mark folded his arms. "If they confirm forgery, the debt goes back to whoever signed it." Duke nodded slowly. "My parents." Mark met his eyes. "Yes." Duke exhaled. This was no longer just a family issue. It was legal. By Wednesday, the pressure from family increased. More calls. More messages. Aunt Clara again. "Think about your parents' health," she said. Uncle Ray sent another message. "Family is more important than money." Duke read them all without replying. He saved everything. Screenshot after screenshot. Every accusation, every demand. The story about him was spreading fast. He was the selfish son who refused to help. The successful one who abandoned his family. None of them had seen the contract. None of them had asked. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a simple answer. Pay the bill and keep quiet. That evening, Lois called again. This time her voice was softer. "Duke, please," she said. "Your father can't sleep." "If we lose the house," Duke interrupted gently, "you won't lose anything because of me. You'll lose it because someone signed my name." Lois's voice tightened. "Don't say that." Duke leaned forward. "Then explain it. Who signed it?" Silence stretched. Then she said quietly, "We had no choice." Duke froze. "You had a choice to ask me," Lois replied quickly. "You would have said no." Duke's voice stayed steady. "Exactly." The line went quiet again. The truth had finally slipped out, even if she tried to hide it. By Friday, Duke received a message from Leo again. "There's a family meeting on Sunday," he wrote. "Your parents want everyone there. They say it's to fix things." Duke read it carefully. A public setting. A chance to pressure him. He understood immediately. "I'll be there," he replied. He closed his phone and looked at Mark. "They think they're setting a trap," Duke said. Mark gave a small smile. "Then walk in prepared." Duke nodded. He already knew what he would bring. The contract, the forged signature, and the proof. This wasn't going to be an argument. It was going to be a reveal. Saturday night, Duke almost left. He opened his laptop and looked at an early flight back to London. One click and everything would disappear. "Just go," he whispered. But Mark shook his head. "That's what they want," he said. "You leave, you pay, and they never answer for it." Duke stared at the screen. "I don't want a fight," Mark replied calmly. "Then don't fight. Just show the truth." Duke closed the laptop slowly. One more day. That was all he needed. One more day to make sure no one ever used his name again without his permission. Sunday morning, Duke dressed simply. White shirt, dark jacket, clean and calm. He placed the printed documents in a folder, the contract, his passport copy, and the letter to the venue. Everything in order. Mark called before he left. "Stay steady," he said. Duke nodded. "I will." The drive to Aunt Clara's house felt quiet. Cars were already parked outside. He sat in his car for a moment, looking at the folder beside him. 15 people inside. Most of them already believed he was wrong. Duke picked up the folder, stepped out, and walked toward the door without hesitation. The room fell silent when Duke entered. Everyone was already seated. John stood at the head of the table. Lois sat beside him, eyes red. Jane looked down, avoiding Duke's gaze. There was no seat for him. Leo quickly pulled a chair from the corner. "Here," he said quietly. Duke nodded and sat. John cleared his throat. "We're here to resolve this," he began. Duke made a commitment to cover the wedding costs, and now he's refusing. Several heads nodded. Lois dabbed her eyes. "We didn't want this to become public," she said softly. The story had already been decided before Duke even spoke. Voices followed quickly. Aunt Clara leaned forward. "Just do the right thing, Duke." Uncle Ray crossed his arms. "You can afford it." Beth barely looked up from her phone. "This shouldn't even be a problem." Duke stayed silent, listening. Then Jane spoke. "I just wanted my brother at my wedding," she said, her voice shaking. "Now it's all about money." Duke watched her carefully. She didn't mention the contract. She didn't mention the truth. At the far end, her husband, Daniel, frowned slightly. "What contract?" he whispered. Jane hushed him quickly. Duke noticed. Not everyone in the room knew the full story. John looked at Duke with confidence. "We have the contract," he said. "You signed it." The room grew still. All eyes turned to Duke. He stood slowly, lifting the folder in his hand. "I've listened to everyone," he said calmly. "Now it's my turn." He walked to the center of the table and placed the contract down. "This is the document you're all talking about." He pointed to the signature line. "That is not my signature." Then he placed his passport beside it. "This is my real signature." The difference was clear. Even from a distance, it didn't match. The room shifted instantly. Aunt Clara reached for the papers first. She held the contract beside the passport, her eyes narrowing. "These don't match," she said slowly. Uncle Ray leaned closer, his expression changing. Beth finally looked up from her phone. Around the table, people shifted in their seats. Duke placed another document down. "The venue has already started an investigation," he said. "They've paused all collection against me." John's face lost color. "That doesn't prove anything," he said quickly. Duke didn't raise his voice. The event coordinator confirmed an older man signed this in person. The room went still. Everyone looked at John. John opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lois grabbed his arm. "We were under pressure," she said, her voice shaking. "We had no choice." Uncle Ray stood up abruptly. "No choice? You signed his name." Aunt Clara turned to Lois. "You told me he agreed." Lois looked down, unable to respond. At the far end, Daniel turned to Jane. "You knew about this?" he asked quietly. Jane hesitated. "It was complicated," she said. Daniel shook his head. It's not complicated. It's wrong. The room split. Some people stepped back. Others stared at John in disbelief. Duke raised his hand slightly. The room quieted. I'm not here to argue, he said. I'm here to be clear. He held up one finger. I never signed that contract. A second finger. I was invited, then turned away so I wouldn't find out. A third finger. I owe nothing. His voice remained steady. No anger. No emotion. Just facts. Lois began to cry softly. Duke, please, she whispered. Duke shook his head. No. I'm done being the person you call only when you need something. He gathered the documents calmly, placing them back into the folder. Without another word, Duke turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped him. No one argued. As he stepped outside, he heard voices rising behind him. Daniel's voice stood out. You lied to me, he said to Jane. You knew about this. Jane tried to explain, but he pulled away. Duke didn't wait to hear more. He reached his car, placed the folder on the passenger seat, and sat quietly for a moment. The air felt different now. Lighter. Not because the situation was fixed, but because the truth was finally out. As Duke started the engine, Leo stepped outside and walked toward him. That took courage, he said. Duke gave a small nod. You helped, he replied. Leo shrugged. They're arguing inside. Most of them are on your side now. Duke glanced back briefly, then forward again. It's not about sides, he said. It's about truth. Leo smiled slightly. Still, you changed everything. Duke nodded once more, then drove away. This time, he didn't feel like he was leaving something behind. He felt like he was finally moving forward. The next morning, Duke checked out of his hotel. As he stood in the lobby, his phone buzzed. An email from the venue. He opened it slowly. After review, the guarantor signature does not match Duke Taylor. The agreement is void. Duke read it twice. The weight he had been carrying lifted instantly. The email continued. All financial responsibility returns to the original parties. John and Lois. Duke closed his eyes briefly, then exhaled. It was over. Not emotionally, but legally. And that mattered. He walked out of the hotel with his head clear for the first time in days. Back in London, life returned to its quiet rhythm. Duke went back to work, reviewing contracts, catching details others missed. But something inside him had shifted. A few days later, Jane called. Her voice was different. Smaller. Daniel doesn't trust me, she said. He found out everything. Duke leaned against his kitchen counter. That's something you have to fix, he replied. Jane hesitated. Can you talk to him? Help me explain. Duke shook his head, even though she couldn't see it. No. That's your responsibility. There was silence. Then a quiet, I understand. The call ended without resolution. A week later, John called. His voice had lost its usual strength. We're trying to pay it off, he said. I sold some equipment. Duke listened quietly. I'm sorry, John added after a pause. Duke looked out his window at the city lights. I hear you, he said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't anger either. Just distance. John sighed softly. I thought you would just handle it like always. Duke replied calmly, That's the problem. I always did. The call ended there. No argument. No shouting. Just truth finally spoken without defense. Messages followed in the days after. Aunt Clara apologized. Uncle Ray admitted he was wrong. Even Beth sent a short text. Leo called just to check in. Duke appreciated it, but he didn't rush to rebuild anything. Some things take time. Some things need space. He went for walks by the river, letting everything settle. Winning didn't feel like victory. It felt like clarity. Like finally seeing things exactly as they were, without excuses. 4 years, he had carried expectations that were never his. Now, he understood he didn't have to carry them anymore. Duke stood by his apartment window one evening, looking out over the quiet city. He thought about that day at the wedding, the gravel path, the closed doors, the words that cut deep. Only family is allowed. He understood now. Family wasn't about who shared your name. It was about who respected it. He glanced at his passport on the table. His signature was clean, steady, his own. No one else had the right to use it. No one else ever would again. Duke Taylor stood there, calm and certain. He had lost nothing that truly belonged to him, and gained something far more valuable: himself. Thank you for listening, and do not forget to subscribe to this channel, Abiwealth Revenge Folktales.